Enterprise, resourcefulness, comradeship, and reckless valour in a good cause. Newstalk ZB thanks our returned servicemen, lest we forget.
Good morning, New Zealand. I'm Chris Lynch. We're broadcasting live from Christchurch this morning with our special Anzac Day program. Thank you so much for your company this morning. On this day in 1915, 8 months into the First World War, Allied soldiers landed on the shores of the Gallipoli Peninsula. The Allied forces encountered unexpectedly strong resistance from the Turkish, and both sides suffered enormous loss of life. This was a military catastrophe which signifies the horrors of war. The forces from New Zealand and Australia fighting as part of the Anzac played an important part in the Gallipoli campaign. New Zealand soldiers, I believe, distinguished themselves with their courage and skill, establishing an enduring bond with the Australians they fought alongside. And although today, Anzac Day, the anniversary of the first day of conflict, it does not mark a military triumph. It does, though, remind us of the very important episode in New Zealand's history. Great suffering was caused to a small country by the loss of so many young men. Lest we forget. So this morning on Newstalk ZB, we'll take you to many parts of the country preparing for Anzac commemorations. We'll cross live to Australia. We'll speak to the Governor-General of New Zealand and the Prime Minister. We'll hear remarkable stories and we'll speak to experts who continue to explore the history of Gallipoli even today. Newstalk ZB Anzac Day with Chris Lynch this morning. Sam Thompson is at the Auckland Dawn service at the War Memorial. Sam, good morning.
Yeah, morning, Chris.
Looks like a big turnout there this morning, Sam.
Oh, there are literally thousands and thousands of people here. I've attended quite a few of this particular dawn ceremony, and I've never seen this big a crowd. I mean, there's lots of old people here, obviously young as well, and there's a lot of children around as well. So what they've actually done is that they've set up this huge big screen because a lot of people can't see what's actually happening at the cenotaph. And so they're taking part in that sort of respect. Now, the kids, lots of them here. And I spoke to a couple of them. One of them was saying, I asked them what they made of it, and one of them was saying, well, I've been told something to do with the war. Another one was, too busy chomping on an Anzac biscuit. Now, what's happened is that they've got Salvation Army here. They are providing tea and coffee, and so people are being taken care of.
Also, Sam, plenty of services in your way as well, near Auckland. Of course, you've got services in Hamilton and Tauranga as well this morning.
That's right. Yeah, there's quite a lot of services all over the place. In fact, in Auckland alone, there's 62 venues where services are being held. And obviously in Wellington as well, in Hamilton as well, and Whangarei, all throughout there's services around.
Excellent. I'll let you get back and sing the rest of the anthem. Thank you. That is Sam Thompson at the Auckland Museum. Tyler Adams is at Cranmer Square in Christchurch this morning. Hello, Tyler.
Good morning to you, Chris.
Another big turnout in Christchurch as well.
It certainly is. We're looking at about 8,000 people that are pouring into Cranmer Square, and they continue to come in at the moment, Chris, with this parade. Walk down Cranmer Street and into the square, and now the Mayor is about to give her opening speech. But certainly another massive turnout, and the people I've spoken down here today, certainly there's a rich history of military service here in Canterbury, stretching throughout the generations of some families, great-grandfathers, fathers, sons, even daughters still serving in the military now. And a lot of people, it is cold down here, Chris, I've got to say. The rain has stayed away, thankfully, but a lot of people have braved the conditions to come down here and pay their respects, which is fantastic to see. And at the moment, we are just waiting to see the Mayor take the stage to give her a welcoming speech.
And I heard you on the news just before, Tyler, saying a really good range of different people there this morning in terms of the age, young and old there this morning, Tyler.
There are, and this seems to be the case for the last couple of years that I've been down here as well, Chris, and it is good to see. It seems again, that it's really in the family, and a lot of people whose great-grandfathers or fathers have served in the military think it's very important that they bring their kids here to pass on the respects through the generations. So again, we're seeing a very good mix of young and old people here, which is very good to see.
That is Tyler Adams at Cranmer Square here in Christchurch. John McDonald is at the Cenotaph outside Parliament. Hello, John.
G'day, Chris.
Describe the atmosphere there for me this morning.
It's been a brilliant morning so far. It was a bit wet overnight, but it's sort of stayed dry for us down here. There's probably a good 6,000 people down by the Cenotaph. And the ceremony is just wrapping up now. The pipe band, the City of Wellington Pipe Band, is leading the official parade back to Pipitea Marae after the service this morning.
Excellent stuff. And, of course, other dawn services underway in Palmerston North and New Plymouth this morning, John?
There are indeed. We've got a 6 o'clock services in both New Plymouth and Palmerston North. And in fact, the Palmerston North one is actually having a helicopter fly over this morning, as well as for their 9 o'clock service over the Civic Square. They're having the Royal New Zealand Air Force doing a flyover for them.
Very good, John. We'll catch up with you again later in the program. Up next, we'll take a short break, but we'll speak to some of our regional reporters. We've got Annette Lunn broadcasting live from Hawke's Bay this morning. We'll also talk to Adam Walker, who is in Dunedin for us. He'll cover off Invercargill and many other places around central Otago, commemorating such an important day this morning as well. It is Newstalk ZB. We're back in just a moment.
Lest we forget, Anzac Day Breakfast with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Newstalk ZB with Chris Lynch on Anzac Day. Covering the bottom of the South Island for us this morning is our reporter Adam Walker. Adam, good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
A busy morning down south your way.
Yeah, that's right, mate. There's looking like there's going to be between 2.5 and 3 dozen events across Otago and Southland. And of course, with this being a 3-day weekend, many people will still be out of town. I'd say quite a few will be in central Otago. And if we're just going to start there, we've got commemorations in Alexandra, Clyde, Omakau, Millers Flat, Roxburgh, Cromwell, Bannockburn, Minnetonka, and of course, Queenstown. Now, looking at the ones in the smaller areas, we've got a wreath-laying ceremony at 11 a.m. in Alexandra, one at March in Clyde at 8:15, in Omakau, a parade at 10 a.m, Millers Flat, a service at 7 a.m, Roxburgh at 9 a.m. at King George Park Playground, Cromwell, a parade at 10 a.m, Bannockburn at 9 a.m. at the War Memorial, and Minnetonka, Andrew Hall Country. The dawn service will be at the Ranfurly War Memorial commencing at 6:30. We've actually got a full-on military parade happening in Fiordland and a wreath-laying ceremony in Kura. But if we look at what's happening in Dunedin, there's going to be a dawn parade at Centrepath Queen's Gardens. So there's something for everyone.
Thank you. That is our reporter Adam Walker. We cross now to Hawke's Bay. Reporter Annette Lunn joins us. Annette, good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
A similar story your way as well. A lot of services happening in your region, Annette.
That's right. Obviously, a lot of dawn services have been held this morning. In Napier for Anzac Day, interesting enough, they had a break of more than 50 years of tradition for today's dawn service. It was moved from the Sound Shell on the foreshore to Memorial Square, which is close to the CBD in Napier. And this area is where the Cenotaph Memorial is. It is also where the Napier RSA has laid 208 crosses inscribed with the name of a Napier veteran killed in World War I as part of the centenary. Those crosses represent those who never returned from the battlefield. So those who turned up for the dawn service this morning were there amongst crosses. And also, though, you do have more opportunities to mark services in Napier. That Memorial Square venue will be the site for today's civic service, which gets underway at 11 o'clock this morning. Chris, finally, interesting enough, the first place in the world to hold an Anzac Day commemoration, Tainui, which is a tiny village east of Masterton in the Wairarapa. They'll be remembering local men and women killed in Gallipoli. They say that they've had the proud recognition of being the first place ever to commemorate Anzac Day. That service there at the War Memorial Hall gets underway 10:30.
That is our Hawke's Bay reporter Annette Lunn, Newstalk ZB.
99 years on, we still remember them. On Anzac Day 2014, this is Newstalk ZB News.
Keep up with Newstalk ZB News.
E kore atou, e koro heketia, pēnei I a tātou.
Perfectly turned out, with medals proudly on their chests, veterans have marched to cenotaphs up and down the country to begin Anzac Day dawn services, and the misty, drizzly start to the morning seems to be no deterrent to the crowds from all over the world. Here's an exchange student from Germany who's at their first Anzac Day commemoration.
Yeah, learning and honor the soldiers that died.
Sam Thompson reports many thousands turned out for the commemorations at Auckland's cenotaph this morning.
I've attended quite a few of this particular dawn ceremony, and I've never seen this big a crowd. But what they've actually done is they've set up this huge big screen because a lot of people can't see what's actually happening at the cenotaph.
And it's a very good turnout in Christchurch as well, where Newstalk ZB's Tyler Adams says a lot of family groups have joined the service at Cranmer Square.
A lot of people whose great-grandfathers or fathers have served in the military think it's very important that they bring their kids here to pass on the respects through the generations. So again, we're seeing a very good mix of young and old people here.
It's a very poignant day for this former serving officer and army chaplain.
A few years back now when we were in Gallipoli, it was interesting to actually see the sites where they had fought, and it's always a matter of coming back to remember the people that I served with and the ones that went before us.
And a dawn service in Wellington. Our reporter John McDonald is at the cenotaph outside Parliament.
There's probably a good 6,000 people down by the cenotaph. And the ceremony is just wrapping up now. The pipe band, the City of Wellington Pipe Band, is leading the official parade back to Pipitea Marae after the service this morning.
And there is a live stream of the Wellington service on our website, newstalkzb.co.nz. Veterans of the war in Afghanistan will be at the front of the march in Sydney this morning. About 18,000 people are expected at the commemorations. I'm Tim Dower at the Newstalk ZB News Centre, 26 to 7.
Lest we forget. Anzac Day Breakfast with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
It's Newstalk ZB broadcasting across New Zealand this morning as we continue our coverage of Anzac Day. Well, a man who's visited Gallipoli and other historical war-torn sites many times is Stephen Parsons from Palmerston North. The travel agent says it's important New Zealanders understand and respect the significance of the site and have the opportunity to walk in the footsteps of our forebears. Stephen Parsons joins me. Good morning.
Good morning, Chris, on our 99th anniversary of Gallipoli.
Indeed. Stephen, you've been to Gallipoli several times. How would you describe the atmosphere, particularly at Anzac Cove, for those who haven't been?
Chris, it becomes a personal experience, and I say I've been there a number of times, but every time I visit there and you stand still, you actually listen to the silence of what actually Gallipoli delivers. I've had some personal experiences, of course, via a family who have fought there, hence the reason for this journey, but it is an eerie place, and particularly if you visit up around Chunnock Bear or Shrapnel Valley or the various other parts where there were field hospitals and so on, you just have to absorb it. It becomes very, very internal and quite emotional.
Describe what you see when you head to places like Anzac Cove.
As it currently looks, and you've seen the historical photographs of the beach area and then the quite severe cliff area and so on. Now there's, of course, the roadway and the Anzac Cove, as you see in the visuals from TV today. You'll see the beautiful lawn area and the seating. But up behind you is the story of Gallipoli. The deep furrowed valleys, the distances that you can see only a certain distance from and then get to the top of it and have to go a further distance. Chunnock Bear, of course, in the August month it was a pretty important time. But all those very intense areas, my wife's grandfather was a stretcher bearer there and relayed some interesting stories of how soldiers were brought down from the heights, how they were in the trenches, how the flies and the dysentery and everything else that went with it through those long months through to December 1915. It's a pretty scary sort of spot to go to as a young fella.
Sightseeing is perhaps not the right way to describe the visit to Gallipoli. It's more of a chance to reflect and pay tribute, isn't it?
It's absolutely that. And the people that are actually travelling on our tour program for 2015 are in most instances reliving what it was for their family member to have actually been on Gallipoli and fought, and in some instances died, and in other instances, of course, have survived because of the family members actually travelling. So it's a pilgrimage of sorts. It's a finding of yourself, and I know that was very much an experience from my point of view. And as the book opens, as the pages flow through the story of time with individual families through diaries and so on, the journey just becomes more intense around a family environment. I mean, I've got a family member who's travelling with his two sons, and they're going to know something more in 12 months' time that they actually never knew in the past. And we just need to hold on to and treasure these opportunities. It's a scary sort of thing to have to commemorate, but that's the reality of what it is to be family and Kiwis.
I guess the other thing that is remarkable is this was the first major campaign that our New Zealand soldiers were involved in, which often gets overlooked, doesn't it?
Well, it does indeed. I mean, the first scrap that New Zealand had was actually in 1914 up in Samoa, but this is a big one. This is where we've got all the, well over 100,000 men that went to Egypt and then got diverted over to Gallipoli. And to actually through the night and then in the morning, and of course our first troops went ashore mid-morning. It was a pretty scary sort of thing to actually happen. Exciting, I guess, in some ways for the young men and so on that day. But the reality would hit home very, very quickly with the loss of life as it actually happened. 2,727 men we lost in that campaign up until December 1915. So not as bad as what we lost on the Western Front over a short period of time. But the reality was, it was a big reality.
Stephen, there's been an overwhelming response from Kiwis wanting to travel to mark the centenary of Gallipoli. Why do you think that is? It's more than just having a look, isn't it?
Oh, it's more than that. It is the patriotism. It's the family side of things. There are some that have actually been there before, but just want to be there at the right time. And of course, through the ballot system, as talked through the media, there are a large number of people that are being successful.
30 seconds.
Our tour program, but we also have people that are travelling that just want to commemorate the family history and have not actually been successful in the ballot program. So it's about Urina Core. It's about the knowledge of standing there on the beach. And if you hear the last post being played, it's about tears in the eyes and just being at one with the history.
Well, I wish you all the very best for today and your 2015 Anzac tour. Stephen Parsons from Palmerston North, appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you, Chris.
On behalf of our listeners, to our returned soldiers, thank you for your service. On Anzac Day, Newstalk ZB remembers.
Newstalk ZB Anzac Day breakfast with Chris Lynch this morning. UK correspondent Gavin Gray is with us. Good morning.
Hi there, Chris.
We commemorate Anzac Day here, of course, both in New Zealand and Australia. What commemorations take place in Britain?
Well, quite a few events planned both in Britain, but not just in London, also around the country and Europe as well. Of course, many of the war dead from New Zealand forces are commemorated in France and Belgium and Turkey, Egypt, Italy and Greece are where the main burials are of New Zealand war dead. And in London, which is going to be at 5 a.m. local time. So, Chris, that's roughly just 9.25 hours from now. There'll be a dawn service at Wellington Arch on Hyde Park Corner, not far from Buckingham Palace, where there'll be a service in front of the Wellington Arch, a very famous site in London. And during that service, wreaths will be laid at both the New Zealand Memorial and the Australian War Memorial. That service lasts approximately 45 minutes. And then at 9:30 in the morning, so at some time after that, the Gallipoli Association service and the wreath-laying ceremony will be started. Now, that's at St. Paul's Cathedral across the city, and that's been organised by the Gallipoli Association. That's a short service and then a wreath-laying ceremony, which will be held in the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral at the Gallipoli Memorial. And then at 11 a.m. Local time, there'll be a wreath-laying ceremony and parade at the Cenotaph in Whitehall, and that, of course, is where Britain remembers its war dead as well. Normally on November the 11th, where Her Majesty normally rules the service, as it were. And then from there, there'll be a short walk across to Westminster Abbey for a commemorative service there, and that will last approximately 1 hour there. And most of the last events, except for the dawn service, do require tickets from the New Zealand High Commission in London.
So this, of course, is and remains a big deal, particularly in London, Gavin.
Yes, very much so, but it would be wrong to think of this as just a London-centric thing. There are plenty of events taking place across the country. In Aberdeen, up in Scotland, there's a service at the cathedral there. The National Memorial Arboretum, where some beautiful trees are coming out into bloom in Staffordshire, is holding something. Conference St Mary, that's also holding an event in Wiltshire to the west of London, in Dublin, in Ireland, Edinburgh in Scotland, Guildford just down the road from where I'm speaking to you as well, Peterborough, north and east of London, Weymouth down on the south coast. That's all on Friday, Anzac Day itself. On the Saturday, then, further events at Cambridge, Morecambe, and then on Sunday back up in Scotland and Ireland again. So a really extensive selection of things that people can attend both in and out of London. And also, Chris, events being organised in the Netherlands, at The Hague. That's on Anzac Day itself. And a further event as well taking place, which will be at Ypres in France, where, of course, so many of the war dead died.
Gavin, numbers here in New Zealand who attend the dawn services, they're increasing. Is it a similar story in Britain? Is the interest increasing year by year?
Yes, I think that's a fair assumption. Of course, this one being a 100th anniversary as well is going to be something that I think will add special poignancy to it. And that, nothing escapes the statisticians, and the awful figures speak for themselves. Over 2 world wars, the number of New Zealand war dead stands at nearly 30,000, 29,983, according to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. That is staggering when you consider how much of a proportion of the male population that signifies at that particular moment in time. That's a staggering figure. And there's been a lot of talk here in the UK as well of not just lest we forget that famous phrase, but also, Chris, looking at ways in which to sustain their memory. There's been some, not anger, but some disgust at how some of the graves are not being tended as perhaps as well they might. I have to stress that is not within the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Their graves are looked after quite beautifully, both here in the United Kingdom and in Europe. But other more famous graves, just in other parts of the country, perhaps in normal churchyards, remembering the war dead, there's been a very big campaign in this country to do just that and to do them honour this year.
Gavin Gray, UK correspondent, appreciate your time this morning.
Cheers, Chris.
It is Newstalk ZB 10 to 7. Newstalk ZB Anzac Day with Chris Lynch. Australian correspondent Donna DeMeo is with us. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Thanks for waking up early for us this morning. I understand the Royals are still in Australia. Are they going to be attending any commemorations this morning?
Well, as you know, Anzac Day is a very, very special day for all Australians and New Zealanders, of course. And today is extra special because we still have the royal couple in town. They've been in Canberra for a couple of days now, and they will be attending the services this morning at Canberra. So the Duke and Duchess, as many, many thousands across Australia, have gotten up early to attend the dawn service. What's going to be happening today? I think it's a wonderful thing. I'm sure you're familiar with the lone pine. Now, what happened was way back when a seed was sent back to Australia by a digger whose brother was killed at Lone Pine Ridge in 1915. That tree now was grown from that seed, is now 30 metres tall in Canberra, and the Duke and Duchess will be presented with a little sapling cultivated from that lone pine, and they will plant that. Now, what's the concern at the moment is that lone pine is getting a little bit old now and one day will die. So they're considering that the tree that will be planted today will one day replace the original lone pine. So that will be a very poignant moment, as you can well imagine. Also, the Royals will be presented with a special plaque that has been carved from a branch of that very tree we've just been mentioning, and they'll be presented that from to Victoria Cross winner Mark Donaldson, and 2 Australian veterans from Afghanistan will present the Victoria Cross replica handcrafted from that tree.
Very nice and special and significant services both in Sydney and Melbourne this morning.
Yes, well, of course, right around the nation there are services, and Sydney attracts about 20,000 people turned out in the heart of Sydney in George Street to remember the fallen. That was last year, so each year it's extraordinary how many people do turn up. There's always an observation on, how many people will attend, will the youngsters come, and lots of families bring their children. I think there remains a significant respect for this day. And this year the march in Sydney will be led by a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. In fact, Commando Damien Tomlinson, he lost both legs and he suffered serious injuries to most of his body when he came across an explosive device in Afghanistan. But he has walked the Kokoda track since, using his prosthetic legs to honour the memory of a friend who also died in Afghanistan. So he will lead the parade in Sydney. So that will be a very solemn moment for him, of course, remembering those that we've lost in Afghanistan and, of course, in all of the wars previous.
Donna, it's fair to say Australia is leading the organisations for next year.
Yes, well, we actually heard from the Duke, and he's actually revealed just yesterday that he's going to be joining Harry in commemorating that 100 years since Gallipoli. And of course, the Anzac spirit is so strong that I think people are very interested to know what they will be doing next year. But in the meantime, I will say that we've heard from the Prime Minister, who naturally gave an Anzac Day, I suppose, statement or released a few words, and he said that I thought it was rather interesting to hear that he said the presence of Australians at Anzac Day events is a demonstration that we are a nation of memory, not just of memorials. So it does show that we still remember all the sacrifices that people have made over the years.
A lot of services, though, take place throughout Australia throughout the day, don't they?
Yes, look, there are Anzac Day marches, and they're saying that in Melbourne about 50,000 people are expected to attend the dawn service, but then they continue on at this extraordinary march. In Melbourne alone, 13,000 people are expected to take part in the march. These are veterans, these are the families of the veterans, and of course the descendants, because as you know, we have lost many in recent times because, they've reached their elder years. And so this march is an extraordinary time as well to the people that line the streets, obviously wearing their Anzac Day badges and the poppies and so forth in memory. It's an extraordinary sight, and that'll be happening in a few hours' time.
Australian correspondent Donna DeMeo, really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
It is Newstalk ZB Anzac Day coverage with Chris Lynch this morning. Let me tell you what is coming up after the 7 o'clock news. We'll speak to the Governor-General of New Zealand, Sir Jerry Mataparai. He's in Gallipoli, so we'll cross to him. A very special lady, a Christchurch born and bred lady, because we are broadcasting from Christchurch this morning, so I want to acknowledge that. This morning we'll speak to a New Zealand woman over in Gallipoli right now. She will sing the national anthem and represent New Zealand, so we'll speak to her. And I have some fascinating interviews with you coming up after the news as well, with both military historians in Australia and, of course, Britain as well. It's a big show ahead. We look forward to more of your company here at Newstalk ZB. We are broadcasting live across the country this morning. And Peter Doyle, who is based in London, he's a military historian. That will be our feature interview. He's also a geologist looking at the topography of Gallipoli. News is next here at Newstalk ZB.
Keep up with Newstalk ZB News. The crowds just keep growing at Anzac Dawn services. The royals to pay their respects in Australia. And baby milk companies blast the ministry. Good morning, I'm Tim Dower. It's 7 o'clock. Tens of thousands have turned out this morning for Anzac Day dawn services at the Auckland Cenotaph. People who've been attending commemorations for the past decade say it's the biggest crowd they've ever seen. Newstalk ZB's Sam Thompson reports people filled every available viewing point.
They're all over the steps, going all the way down on the lawns, way past the museum building itself. A lot of people couldn't really see what was happening. Most of them were saying that all we could do was just hear what was going on. There's a good sound system here. There's a big screen that has been set up, but a lot of people couldn't even see that either.
And the dawn service at the Cenotaph in Wellington has just wrapped up as well. John McDonald reports a crowd of around 6,000 was there, and luckily the rain stayed away.
The Prime Prime Minister laid a wreath on behalf of New Zealand, as well as the Australian High Commissioner and the Turkish Shah's Affair. So it's damp underfoot, but it's been a nice dawn. It's been quite dry.
There are commemorations around the country and throughout the day. Dunedin reporter Adam Walker told Chris Lynch, as well as the dawn service in Dunedin, up to 36 services are planned around the lower south. Here are just a few of them.
We've got commemorations in Alexandra, Clyde, Omakau, Millers Flat, Roxburgh, Cromwell, Bannockburn, Minnetonka, and of course Queenstown. We've actually got a full-on military parade happening in Fiordland and a wreath-laying ceremony in Kura.
And it's the same in cities, towns and communities right across the country. Newstalk ZB's Hawke's Bay reporter Annette Lunn explained to Chris Lynch the proud history of Anzac services in the tiny settlement of Tainui.
The tiny village east of Masterton in the Wairarapa. They'll be remembering local men and women killed in Gallipoli. They say that they've had the proud recognition of being the first place ever to commemorate Anzac Day. That service there at the War Memorial Hall gets underway 10:30.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will be paying their respects in Australia. Prince William and Catherine end their 10-day tour, taking part in commemorations at the Australia War Memorial in Canberra. They won't be at a dawn service, but will attend the mid-morning event, with the Duke and Duchess laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier.
On behalf of our listeners, to our returned soldiers, thank you for your service. On Anzac Day, Newstalk ZB remembers.
Good morning, New Zealand. I'm Chris Lynch, broadcasting live from Christchurch this morning. Thank you for your company as we continue our coverage of Anzac Day. We'll cross live to our reporters across the country at various dawn services. We'll also catch up with our Governor-General, Sir Jerry Matapuro, at Gallipoli as well.
On April 25th, Anzac Day, Newstalk ZB remembers.
Prime Minister John Key is with us this morning. Hello, Prime Minister.
Morning, Chris.
You were at the service outside Parliament today. A big turnout there as well.
There was. It was a big turnout. It was quite a beautiful morning, actually, not at all cold and no rain. And so a huge group of people from all ages. Obviously, the forces, well and truly represented, but equally an awful lot of young people there this morning.
Which I was going to ask you about. It is humbling to see our youngest generation turning out in their droves to these services. What do you put that down to?
Well, I think it's a sense of nationhood and shared history both with Australia, but a deep understanding, actually, of young people about the role that their forefathers played in forging peace and prosperity for our country. And I think as the years have gone by, we've got better, actually, at taking a moment to reflect and say thanks to those that gave tremendous service and often huge sacrifice for our country.
I think you're right. We have got better in commemorating such atrocities across the world. Is that because we're becoming more real in terms of we just understand how powerful and how devastating our history of war can be?
I suspect so. There's probably a variety of reasons. If you go all the way back to World War I, you think about the colossal loss of life, both in absolute terms and as a percentage of our population. And then you consider modern-day warfare. Typically, while modern-day warfare, if it claims one life, it's one life too many. The numbers of casualties and fatalities are generally so much smaller. I think for young people at one level, it's trying to comprehend that such large swaths of people could go offshore from small towns around New Zealand and never return. And you see that when you go around these memorial halls. And I was in Motueka yesterday, and there at their memorial was the names of, clearly three brothers from one family, a very small town in New Zealand back in 1914, 1915. Would have been utterly devastating, and to be able to comprehend that is quite challenging.
A final message for our returned servicemen this morning?
Well, I think it's just a moment to say thank you for their service and their sacrifice and their contribution to our nation, and I think to say on behalf of the people of New Zealand that we'll never forget the enormous contribution that they made, and that our country is a better place for them and their most selfless acts. So we're and remain incredible New Zealanders.
Prime Minister John Key, appreciate your time this morning.
Okay, Chris, all the very best.
Newstalk ZB, we cross live to our reporters next. It's 7:15. Newstalk ZB Anzac Day with Chris Lynch this morning. There have been dawn services up and down the country. In Christchurch at Cranmer Square is reporter Tyler Adams. Hello, Tyler.
Good morning to you, Chris.
How was this morning's service?
It was very well received by the over 8,000 people that were here. Leanne Dalzell, she had a welcoming speech, and she talked about the Anzac spirit that Canterbury certainly embodies, and also the bravery of our former sons that served in all the conflicts. The president of Canterbury Malaya Services Association told the crowd that over the years the word Anzac has come to emphasise the friendship between both us and Australia, but certainly the over 8,000 people that turned up here today were quite emotional when the last post played, but certainly were very much, enjoyed is the word, and were able to pay their respects, and we're certainly happy to see a good mixture of young and old. A lot of kids down here this morning, Chris.
Thank you, Tyler. John McDonald is in Wellington. Hello, John.
G'day, Chris.
A powerful service in the nation's capital.
Indeed, we had a very good turnout here. The weather was kind to us. It had been wet overnight, but we had a good service there. There was a good 6,000 plus people there. The address was given by Air Marshal Jeff Brown of the Royal Australian Air Force. He spoke about the Gallipoli campaign being the birth of the two nations of New Zealand and Australia, and it really marked our aspirations of two new nations and the importance of standing shoulder to shoulder, and as well as bringing up to date with current work that the two nations are doing. The wreath laying, we had Prime Minister John Key on behalf of the government, the people of New Zealand, the Australian High Commissioner, and the Turkish Charge d'Affaires. There was a big parade that then left to the Pipitea Marae, where they had the traditional coffee and drum and Anzac biscuits.
Very good. Sam Thompson is at the Auckland War Memorial. Sam, a lot of people turning out there today. We've got 30 seconds.
That's right. Tens of thousands of people actually turned up. The crowd was just phenomenal. They spilled all over the lawns, over the steps, and most of the people actually couldn't actually see what was happening because of the crowd. Even though there was a large screen out there, there was a lot of emotion. I could see a lot of people with tears. And they lingered later on after the ceremony and just basically made their way around the field of remembrance, and a lot of people just stayed behind paying their respects.
Thank you, Sam. The Governor-General of New Zealand in Gallipoli joins us next.
Lest we forget. Anzac Day Breakfast with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Governor-General of New Zealand, Sir Jerry Mataparai, joins me. Good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
Thank you for your time this morning. Is it fair to say, as the years go by, the interest in what happened to our soldiers at Gallipoli gets stronger, even for our youngest generation?
I think that would be a fair assessment, and you witness that each year as we commemorate the Anzac landing, more and more people come to the ceremonies, and despite weather and so on.
The sacrifices of Gallipoli forged deep bonds between New Zealand and Australians. I mean, despite our light-hearted jostling at times, that relationship remains stronger than ever before today, doesn't it?
The relationship with Australia is particularly strong, and especially we remember that around Anzac Day, and to the effect also that even today, the defence forces of both countries are able to work together probably more closely than any other defence forces in the world.
What do you hope New Zealanders will take away from Anzac Day?
I guess the issue about Anzac Day is it's significant for us as people in understanding who we are, where we are, and where we stand in the world. And the Anzac example, in terms of a campaign, it was the first campaign that New Zealanders fought in the First World War, in a significant way. It's the blooding of, our nationality in many ways.
You talk about Kiwis wanting to realise or think about our significance in the world as New Zealanders. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think in modern times, we demonstrate those traits in terms of compassion, in terms of courage, and in terms of tolerance. And we demonstrate them in as much as, when we are interacting with other people, we build a confidence with them that is based on mutual respect. And I think that is the essence of who we are and what we are and how we conduct ourselves in the modern world.
In these modern world and, I guess, troubling times, do you hope that young Kiwis will draw inspiration from those who have gone before on a day like Anzac Day?
I think they do, as it is now, Chris. And I think that is why we are seeing lots of young New Zealanders using Anzac Day to reflect on our nationhood, on our nationality. And it's those sorts of things that probably provide the answer to why young Kiwis are turning up at Anzac Day commemorative events at home, but more particularly wanting to go to pay pilgrimage, to pay homage in Gallipoli. Next year, given that it's the 100th anniversary and there has been a ballot, the ballot for places for New Zealanders was totally oversubscribed. And I've met a couple of people who have been successful in the ballot, and many of them have got cause to go because of a grandfather or a great-grandfather who was there. And I think these things are important to remember, that many, many New Zealanders identify with Anzac Day as a national remembrance and commemorative day. I think it's fantastic that that we do have that as a place where we can sort of go.
Sir Jerry, on a day like Anzac Day, we remember not only those who served during the First World War, but also the servicemen and women today who continue to answer the call to defend our freedoms. What do you make of the state of our role in defending the principles of freedom in New Zealand and, of course, across the globe?
Well, I think New Zealanders in all walks of life, but particularly in the Defence Force, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force, latch on to the example. I know that the example that the Anzacs set was a high one, and each one of those young men and women in the Defence Force now subscribes to, the values of courage and commitment and comradeship and integrity, which, again, if you look at the parallel between service then and service now, it's still pretty much the same.
Sir Jerry Matapurai, take me through this morning's official events. What happens this morning over at Gallipoli?
We will start at Anzac Cove with the dawn service, and that's a joint Australian and New Zealand mainly commemorative service, and that's where lots of young Kiwis and Aussies turn up, sleep in sleeping bags, get entertained during the night, and then start very early in the morning. From there, there's a succession of remembrance activities with the Turkish. There's another Turkish ceremony. Then there's the Australian one at Lone Pine. And for us, we complete ours as we wind our way up the ridges to Chinook Bear, which is a place of real significance, I think, for New Zealand in terms of the campaign at Gallipoli.
Sir Jerry, have you got a special message to the people of New Zealand listening to this morning?
From all of these, really deep and dark places, there is a silver lining, which is, there is a better peace, and sometimes you do have to fight for that better peace.
And may that peace continue in New Zealand. Governor-General of New Zealand, Sir Jerry Matapurai, really appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks, Chris.
And coming up after the news at 7:30, I'll speak to an Australian military historian, James Brown, who says we must also focus on the living. That's next here at Newstalk.
Anzac Day special broadcasts featuring Chris Lynch and Danny Watson on Newstalk ZB.
Good morning. At 7:30, the crowd at this morning's dawn service at Auckland War Memorial Museum is believed to be the biggest in decades. Tens of thousands squeezed onto the museum's steps and the surrounding lawns as dignitaries, veterans and serving soldiers filed into the Court of Honour in front of the cenotaph. 3 riders on horseback led the start of the ceremony, acknowledging horses killed in the war. Around 6,000 people stood silently on a beautiful, dry Wellington morning as the Prime Minister laid a wreath at the National Cenotaph. John Key told Chris Lynch it's great to see so many young people making the effort to turn out on Anzac Day.
Yeah, I think as the years have gone by, we've got better actually at taking a moment to reflect and say thanks to those that gave tremendous service and often huge sacrifice for our country.
The size of the crowd in Christchurch is put at around 8,000. Newstalk ZB's Tyler Adams was there.
Leanne Dalzell, she had a welcoming speech and she talked about the Anzac spirit that Canterbury certainly embodies and also the bravery of our sons, former sons that served in all the conflicts. The president of Canterbury Malaya Services Association told the crowd that over the years the word Anzac has come to emphasise the friendship between both us and Australia, but certainly the over 8,000 people that turned up here today were quite emotional when the last post played.
And John McDonald reports 6,000 at the service in Wellington.
The address was given by Air Marshal Jeff Brown of the Royal Australian Air Force. He spoke about the Gallipoli campaign being the birth of the two nations of New Zealand and Australia, and it really marked our aspirations of two new nations and the importance of standing shoulder to shoulder.
In Auckland, Sam Thompson looked on as a crowd swelled to tens of thousands.
There was a lot of emotion. I could see a lot of people with tears. And they lingered later on after the ceremony and just basically made their way around the field of remembrance. And a lot of people just stayed behind paying their respects.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have made a surprise appearance at the dawn service in Canberra. William and Kate weren't expected to show up, but they joined Governor-General Peter Cosgrove at the Australia War Memorial. Anzac Day in Wellington will conclude with a concert with a wartime feel. Council Events Manager Lauren Fantham says Songs from Times of War is a musical tribute to servicemen and women from both world wars.
Quite long-standing concert run by the Deep Girls of the RNZAF Swing Band, and that's going to be held at the Opera House. It's a gold coin entry, and we want people to get along and really enjoy a good upbeat concert.
Lest we forget, Anzac Day Breakfast with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Good morning, New Zealand. Thank you so much for your company this morning, this Anzac Day. We're broadcasting live from Christchurch, and I must say it truly is an honour to share such a special day with you this morning. Well, in a moment, I'll speak to an Australian military historian by the name of James Brown, who says we must focus on the living, those still serving in wars across the planet today. And some very exciting news, fingers crossed, we'll also cross live to Antarctica, where New Zealand scientists down there are holding a dawnless service.
Enterprise, resourcefulness, comradeship and reckless valour in a good cause. Newstalk ZB thanks our returned servicemen. Lest we forget.
We head to Sydney now. My next guest has been described by a former CNN war correspondent in Baghdad as one of Australia's most insightful strategic analysts. Author James Brown says it's now time for us to remember not only our fallen, but our living. James Brown, thank you for your time this morning.
No problem, Chris.
In your view, what do you think the message of today should be for Australians and New Zealanders?
I think there's a couple of messages that are important today. The first is really just acknowledging what incredible loss people in both countries have suffered, not only in the wars of 100 years ago, but in the wars since then. The second thing I think that's really important today is to reflect on what we've learnt about going to war and what we've learnt about the military, and I think that's a very important thing that helps us think about the future as well.
Well, that's an interesting point. What have we learnt from war in the past? Because we're still plagued by them today.
It's a big question. I think we've learnt that getting the strategy right is really important, and that it's not something that politicians can sit back from, but they need to be actively involved in managing. I think we've learnt that sometimes you go into war with the best of intentions, but things get foggy and complex and they don't turn out the way you expect. I think we've learnt particularly that we can't just send men and women to war and forget about them when they come home, that there are ongoing efforts for reintegrating them and rehabilitating them that need to take place as well.
I want to come to that shortly, but I suppose sadly the strategy for Gallipoli was always one that was doomed to fail, wasn't it, given the geography of the land?
There are different views on that. Some people think it was a brilliant concept, poorly executed. Other people think the strategy was wrong from the start. But regardless, what happened became disastrous. Landing at the wrong location, not following through when we had the advantage, really underestimating just how trained the Turkish troops were and how untrained Australian and New Zealand troops were.
As an international community, have we somewhat failed to learn from the past, considering major conflicts continue today in various Middle Eastern countries?
I can't speak from New Zealand's perspective, but from Australians' perspective, I think in the last 10 years of the Afghan experience, we've really had a strategy that's jumped around quite a bit. I mean, in Australia's deployment in Orisgan, for example, at first we decided we wouldn't work outside of the province borders, then we changed our mind. We didn't want to take command in Oruzgan when the Dutch left, and then we changed our mind. So there's still a lot we can learn from looking at military strategy in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. But we have learned a lot since certainly the kind of conflicts that Australia and New Zealand were involved in World War I.
The horrors of war are often sanitised for the public. Is there a danger too much of this portrays an unrealistic illustration of war in modern society?
One of the problems we have now is that wars are often fought far away by professional soldiers. And, Australia and New Zealand have been fighting in Afghanistan for years, but life in Australia and New Zealand every day has seemed pretty normal. So the public run the risk that they become very distant from the wars that their militaries are fighting, and that makes it hard to get to grips with the complexities of what's confronting our militaries.
Author and military analyst James Brown from Sydney, really appreciate your time this morning.
No problem at all, Chris.
Anzac Day 2014 with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Newstalk ZB, 8:15. Anzac Morning with Chris Lynch. We cross live now to Scott Base, Antarctica, where scientists there will hold a dawnless service. And telecommunications technician Keith Roberts is with us. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Chris.
Thanks for your
up there.
Well, very well. Thanks for your time this morning. The sun's gone down for the season already, Keith, has it?
Yeah, we had the last sunset yesterday.
Is that a weird experience to be working with no sun for an entire season? You must be used to it now.
I'm used to it. This is my 11th winter down here, and it's not really any different back home. I go to work in the dark, come home in the dark in winter, and work inside most of the day. So,
what do you need to do differently though in your daily work? Winter weather at low light, etc.
The main thing is to keep a routine going. It's very easy to slip without the prompt of the sunlight to have your daily clock go out of whack, and you'll be sleeping in the middle of the day. So keep a routine, you'll be fine.
What a weird experience. What was it like for your first winter? Was it sort of exciting, scary?
There was a bit of excitement. There was a lot of trepidation, I suppose, as being the only person down here to fix things if they went wrong in the communications world. And if it went wrong, nobody to get in touch with.
Well, that's true, but of course you are a telecommunications technician. Anything is possible, so I'm glad we can talk to you, and you sound pretty good too. Is this a satellite phone, is it?
Yeah, we have a satellite link from Scott Base through to Warkworth in New Zealand and then on to the rest of the world.
Ironically, it sounds much clearer than some of the conversations I have even in New Zealand, I must say. Listen, what does the Anzac Dawnless service mean to you? What does it feel like?
Well, we don't really not have a dawn. We have a very extended dawn here now, so the start get light about 9 o'clock, and to me it feels like, just very much normal for an Anzac Day.
You'll be conducting...
I do remember my dad down here, so, I'm always thinking of my dad. He was in the Second World War.
Do you feel, for you and your scientists, it is incredibly important to conduct a service in Antarctica?
I think it's important to conduct a service no matter where you are, so Antarctica really is no difference. It's important to maintain a presence down here, and Anzac Day is one of the ways of doing it.
Let's discuss the actual ceremony. What takes place in a couple of hours?
Well, we basically go through a very basic Anzac ceremony like in New Zealand. This particular year we have a piper to start the ceremony at 10 o'clock, and then there's a couple of readings of various poems and the usual thing for the fallen. Then we play the last post, lower the flag to half-mast, and 1 minute silence. Then there's playing Reveille and read the normal ode, and then it's back in for morning tea.
Now, well, that's what my next question I was going to ask you, and forgive my ignorance. You can actually do this outside. You're not going to get too chilly.
Well, today might be a little bit chilly. It's about -30 and there's 20 knots of wind blowing, so the wind chill will be well into the low 40s, -40, so it might be a little bit marginal outside today.
Oh, that sounds very chilly indeed. How many scientists have you got down at Scott Base who will actually be involved in this morning's commemoration, Keith?
Not too many scientists at all. There's the standard base staff that works down here. That's 10 of us. Then there's an extra carpenter working on the administration block refurbishment, and there's 4 conservators with the Antarctic Heritage Trust working on artefacts from Discovery in Cape Evan. So there's no real scientists down here at the moment at Scott Base.
Is it fair to say, Keith, that you must know your work colleagues pretty reasonably well, considering you're living in quite close quarters, and you can't really go outside all that much, can you?
Yeah, there's always the possibility of getting outside and doing a bit of screaming and ranting, but you do get to learn to get along with people, and you do have to get along with people, otherwise there's going to be big trouble down here.
Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. I wish you all the very best for your dawnless service, and thank you for your time this morning. That is telecommunications technician in Scott Base, Keith Roberts. It is Newstalk ZB.
Anzac Day 2014 with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Newstalk ZB, Anzac Morning with Chris Lynch. Thank you so much for your company this morning. RSA CEO David Moja is with us. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Chris. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for your time this morning. A very important day for our returned servicemen this morning.
Absolutely right. In many ways, it is the most important day, I would argue, for all of us as New Zealanders, actually.
How relevant is the Returned Servicemen Association today?
I believe it's actually very relevant. If you look at the actual signed-up membership that we have across the country, it's 105,000 people, and that in itself is not a small number. But what we know is that within each household, you normally only have one person that's signed up as an actual member. So we're probably talking about touching and reaching a very substantial percentage of the New Zealand population. And what we're seeing as well is more and more young people coming in, and we are now engaging increasingly with those young people through cadet forces and through some other initiatives that we're doing to reach out and touch younger people and help them to understand what Anzac Day is all about, but what really sits behind that in terms of the service and sacrifice of our Defence Force personnel and all those that have served.
It's an interesting point you make, David, that our young people are becoming more and more interested in Anzac Day. What do you put that down to?
Oh, undoubtedly, the fact that we are coming up to the World War I centenary commemorations is having a huge impact. It's said that sometime between the landing on the beaches at Gallipoli and the battles on the Western Front, New Zealand became a nation. And I think people, particularly young people, are looking for that sense of identity and going back to those core Anzac spirit values of courage, commitment, comradeship and compassion as the foundations of what our nation is built on. And that's drawing them in. And I think there's also a huge personal interest. And we've seen this through the ballot that happened for the actual trip to Gallipoli next year for the actual 100th centenary itself. Huge numbers of people wanting to connect with their family line and understand in real terms what happened in their past.
David, war continues today. What lessons can our younger generation learn from the Gallipoli campaign?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, because the way in which wars are fought and the way in which conflict is dealt with and the way in which our Defence Force personnel are deployed today is very, very different from the way it was done 100 years ago. We don't see that physical, fixed position kind of alignment. We now have a Defence Force that is very much more modern. Technology has taken a big play in how our Defence Force personnel engage in operations. But the common factor is that our people put themselves in harm's way. They are prepared to lay down their lives. And we've seen that in the recent deployments, for example, in Afghanistan, where we continue to lose people on the front line. And the reality is, a bullet in those days is exactly the same as a bullet today. It does the same damage, but you could actually argue these bullets do more.
David, a lot of services being held right up and down the country this morning and, of course, this afternoon, perhaps more so than ever before. That must be humbling for you.
Oh, it is. We have 182 RSAs around the country, and all of them are running multiple services. And the demand that we are being asked to be involved in helping people to commemorate and helping people to gather together is you're absolutely, is hugely humbling and such an awesome privilege that we are the first port of call when people want to know how to do things, or when people want to ask the question, can we do this? How should we do that? How do we commemorate in an appropriate way? Is it okay to celebrate as well as commemorate? They come to us. And for an organisation that's been around, we celebrate our 100th birthday in 2016. We are as relevant today as when we were set up to welcome back those troops from World War I campaigns. We have a fantastic need in the country.
Without a doubt. What is your message for our returned servicemen this morning?
Very simple. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for the sacrifices. Thank you for the fact that you show those true Anzac spirit values that are the foundation of our country. And when I was watching the service here in Auckland in the Domain this morning in front of the War Museum, it was so clear the huge respect for those veterans as they marched in. And people look at them, and I think everybody was saying thank you.
And David, wasn't it just wonderful to see so many people there, so many different age groups as well?
Absolutely. I was just in the crowd this time, which was great for me because normally I'm sort of doing all sorts of things. But it was lovely. I was just standing in the crowd, and kids brushing up against my legs as they're pushing forward to the front. Young people standing together, couples, families, and I'm looking around thinking, wow, this is actually what the core of us as a nation is, to stand together like that. And it was an amazing experience, an amazing atmosphere, and I'm basically very overwhelmed, quite frankly. It was outstanding.
RSA CEO David Mojer, really lovely to speak with you this morning. Wish you all the best and have a fantastic day.
Thank you, and you too.
News is next here at Newstalk ZB this Anzac Day.
Keep up with Newstalk ZB News. The Governor-General delivers his Anzac Day message. Emotions to the surface at Auckland's ceremony, and 8,000 up before dawn in Christchurch. Good morning, I'm Tim Dower. It's 8 o'clock. A special message this Anzac Day morning from Governor-General Sir Jerry Mataparai to all New Zealanders.
From all of these, really deep and dark places, there is a silver lining, which is, there is a better peace, and sometimes you do have to fight for that better peace.
Sir Jerry's been speaking to Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB this morning ahead of the dawn service at Gallipoli, which will get underway in a few hours. He explains services there start with a Turkish commemoration, followed by an Australian service at Lone Pine.
For us, we complete ours as we wind our way up the ridges to Chinook Bear, which is a place of real significance, I think, for New Zealand in terms of the campaign at Gallipoli.
Here, tens of thousands have turned out for dawn services. In Auckland, it was reckoned to be the biggest crowd in decades, more than 10,000. A big screen was set up on the side of the cenotaph outside the War Memorial Museum, but the crowd was so large, not everyone could see even that. Many people, including Andrina Wickers, were moved to tears.
It was long enough and it had everything in it. Yeah, it was very enjoyable. And I have to say, my father fought in Gallipoli, so it's very pertinent.
And Alan Wolford also found it very moving.
Very moving. This is my first time. I'm a visitor from the UK. I'm ex-British Army. My regiment fought at Gallipoli alongside Australian and New Zealand forces, so it was a great opportunity to pay my respects to my fallen comrades in my own regiment and those that I work with today.
More than 8,000 braved the cold April morning in Christchurch's Cranmer Square. As Newstalk ZB's Tyler Adams reports, they were adorned with poppies and huddled together for warmth.
Mayor Leanne Dalzell, in her welcoming speech, spoke of honouring the Anzac spirit that was forged 99 years ago on the shores of Gallipoli. Veterans and regular attendees were heartened to see even more young children at this year's event to carry on the legacy. Services will continue throughout the city this morning. Tyler Adams, Cranmer Square in Christchurch, Newstalk ZB.
Prime Minister John Key has laid a wreath in the capital, and he told Chris Lynch it's humbling to see so many young people turn out to early services. Mr Key says it shows a growing sense of nationhood.
A deep understanding, actually, of young people about the role that their forefathers played in forging peace and prosperity for our country.
Services are also underway across the Tasman. In Canberra, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge were surprise guests at the Australia War Memorial.
We are born of the Anzacs. We are the custodians and stewards of their spirit now and into the future. We must take good care of it.
Neither William or Kate were expected to make an appearance, but they were alongside Governor-General Peter Cosgrove for the early service. For many service personnel today, it's Anzac Day on the job. The Army's been called in to help the clean-up in southern Westland after one of the worst storms on the west coast in living memory. Roads have been cleared and power's back on for most, following the battering the region took from the tail of Cyclone Ita.
Lest we forget, Anzac Day breakfast with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Good morning, New Zealand. It is 11 past 8 here at Newstalk ZB. Thank you so much for your company this morning, this Anzac Day. We're broadcasting live from Christchurch this morning, and I have to say it truly is an honour to share such a special day with you and your family.
Anzac Day breakfast with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Well, could it be that the Gallipoli campaign was doomed before it even began? British geologist, military historian and battlefield archaeologist Peter Doyle believes no amount of leadership could have ever saved such a flawed campaign. Peter joins me from London this morning. Peter, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for your time this morning. You maintain the Allied soldiers were never fighting just one enemy, which I find quite fascinating. What do you mean by that?
Well, you have to imagine what it was like for these guys. They were landing from open boats. They were moving across very difficult and broken terrain, and they were facing an enemy who was well dug in. So really what I mean is the terrain, the topography was an enemy that the Allied soldiers really couldn't defeat, and it is that caused ultimately the defeat of the Allies and of the very strong Turkish response as well.
Peter Doyle, what I find quite fascinating also is that research on the battlefield continues even to this day. What kind of research are we talking about?
Well, the battlefield, it's a fascinating battlefield to work on. It's got so many different what-ifs. What if this? What if that? Could the Allies have actually made a difference? Could they have pushed their way through? Research is being carried out in order to understand how that battlefield really worked and operated, what the opportunities were for the Allies to break out of the perimeter, and specifically looking at real detail on, mapping out the surface of the terrain, and also looking at the archaeological remains, because it's of great importance to many nations, New Zealand, France, Australia, Britain, India. There's so many nations that were playing out there. Not only that, of course, the Ottoman Turks also.
Peter Doyle, some harvesting continues on the battlefield at Gallipoli. I do find it fascinating that even today, weaponry and even bones are unearthed by tractors.
That's absolutely true, and there has been a large amount of works have been carried out recently in the area as the Turks are memorializing the location. This means that, unfortunately, the bones are being turned out because we think about the size of Anzac, for example, the Anzac sector. That was really only 3.5 kilometers by a kilometer in size, and so you think about the great loss of life there. And the fact that these men were lying out in the open and quite often very difficult to bury or find. So really we're seeing a great mixture of weapons, of buttons, of the impedimenta of war, things lying around, but also very sadly bones. And it was relatively common to find things like pelvic bones. I've seen myself in the scrub there. It's a real telling feature of that battlefield that we really do see the evidence of that, and I think anybody that visits that, and I'm sure that people will be visiting there very soon, they will be experiencing the real pity of that battlefield. How important it was and how deadly it was, and I think those things are really telling us that.
Peter, is there an official process that goes on if new things are discovered, like weaponry or bones?
anything which is found on the battlefield belongs to the Turkish state. It is illegal to bring any of that material out. It's illegal to go prospecting for these things. So the vast majority of things which are turned up are obviously turned over to the Turkish authorities. So each one of those artifacts and objects will play their part in mapping out the future interpretation of those battlefields, and again, they will remain within Turkey.
We need to take a short break. When we return, I want to talk to you, Peter, about the maps provided to the British soldiers and the Anzacs. We'll be right back here at Newstalk ZB. Newstalk ZB, nationwide coverage of Anzac Day this morning. We're back with military historian Peter Doyle from London. Peter, the maps provided to the British soldiers and the Anzacs, a lot of contention over this one, but by all accounts, they were woefully primitive to the point of just being wrong.
These maps, it has been a long debated issue, the issue of the maps. If you take the maps were produced pre-First World War. They were actually the best that were available. But the amount of detail that was presented upon them was quite poor. This is one of the questions which has arisen in most people's histories. I think if you look at those maps, the spacing of the contour lines gives an impression of a much more sort of wide, open place, not very many gullies and difficult ridges, and it smooths things out. If you look at the maps in a little bit more detail, you can see things like the ridges and gullies. The real critical one was the fact that when the Anzacs were landing, they were intending to rise up 3 ridges to get to the very top of the Sari Bear Range, which was one of the major hills there. And unfortunately, the map shows this very clearly. It shows that there would be a first ridge, would be an open access, would give a route to the top. Now that, as anybody knows, is the Razor's Edge. The Razor's Edge is a very sharp ridge which is impassable. So it meant that as the Anzacs, the Australians who first got out those boats, at 5:30 in the morning, and they were rising up that ridge, they suddenly were faced with an impassable and therefore pretty impossible task of getting up. So that map was giving a false impression. So although in some areas it's been much maligned, I think in that particular point that map was plainly wrong.
Turkish historian Kanan Çalık maintains the beaches of Gallipoli were defended by only 100 or so Turkish soldiers, which doesn't seem many compared to the thousands that descended on the beach. What's your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting thing. The problem we have with Turkish sources is, of course, they were written in Arabic script. And that Arabic script is pretty dense and very difficult to try and interpret. So the number of accounts which have arisen from Turkish sources are not as many as we have in the sort of Allied sector. If we take that as true, then this is a real good indicator of the importance of terrain, and I've written about this myself. Terrain acts as a force multiplier. It means that the very shape and form of the topography multiplies the effect of the weaponry and the fire of the Turks. These Turkish soldiers were underestimated by the British Anzacs.
I could talk to you for hours. British geologist, military historian and battlefield archaeologist Peter Doyle, thank you so much for joining me this morning from London. Have a fantastic day.
Thanks very much.
8:22 here at Newstalk ZB. Newstalk ZB breakfast on Anzac Day. Now, because we are broadcasting live from Christchurch this morning, I thought it was only right to acknowledge a locally born singer who performs in the Royal New Zealand Navy Band by the name of Rebecca Nelson. Rebecca's had the honour of performing the national anthem for many countries in major sporting events in front of crowds of over 45,000 people. In several hours, Rebecca will no doubt make this country proud and sing New Zealand's national anthem at the dawn service at Gallipoli. Rebecca joins me by the phone from Gallipoli. Good morning to you.
Hey, how's it going?
Thank you so much for your time this morning. You are over in Gallipoli right now. Have you had a chance to have a look around some of the beaches, some of the amazing landmarks over there?
We sure have. We've been lucky enough to go do the tours around Gallipoli, and it's been absolutely fantastic. Thoroughly enjoyed every moment. It's very sombering, being around a place like this.
Let's talk about why you're over there. You are representing New Zealand. You are performing with the Royal New Zealand Navy Band. How did this all come about?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of an interesting story. So So I was a busker, and I was busking up in Auckland. I live up there now, and I was approached by the Navy about a year ago, and we started going away on tours, and I've been their guest soloist for a few things, and it made sense for me to join as a reservist. And from there, they sat me down and said, look, we want you to take you over to Gallipoli to sing the anthems, and I just really obviously couldn't turn it down.
Are you nervous? I mean, in several hours' time, you will be singing on behalf of New Zealand, our national anthem.
Yes. This especially will be a very rememberable moment in my career. And I'm going to be very nervous. Come on.
You will also be singing at various locations at Gallipoli before the actual commemorations?
Yes. So we entertainment throughout the evening and early morning. And then the dawn service starts at 5:30. We also have our own service around lunchtime up at Chinook Bear, singing there as well, the national anthem.
Have you been to the actual location where you will perform, where you'll sing the national anthem?
Yes. We've been there rehearsing daily.
What's that like? I mean, do you think, my goodness me, I'm going to be representing our country singing the national anthem at this location for such a special occasion?
Oh, completely. The first time, we all rocked up there, we all had to take a moment to stand where we would be performing and really have a think about what we're doing. It's incredible, absolutely incredible.
I mean, your story is quite interesting, how you were discovered. I mean, you were in Auckland, you were spotted by the Navy band's conductor. I mean, what happened? Did they just come up to you and say, we want you, or how did that actually work?
He just came up to me, took a business card. We ended up doing a gig together anyway, an anthem at a racetrack. Car racing, and just from there we just built a relationship, and we sat down one day and I just said, look, if you ever need a singer, I'd love to be able to perform with you more, and it just grew from there.
And here you are in Gallipoli this morning. Well, listen, I wish you all the very best, Rebecca.
Oh, thank you so much.
So what does Anzac Day mean for you? Get on the phone right now, 0800 80 1080. We'll take your calls after the news, which is next.
99 years on, we still remember them. On Anzac Day 2014, this is Newstalk ZB News.
Keep up with Newstalk ZB News. Good morning, I'm Tim Dower. It's 8:30. Governor-General Sir Jerry Mataparai sees the Anzac campaign as the blooding of our nationality. He told Chris Lynch the Anzac experience is significant for New Zealanders as a people, understanding who we are and where we stand in the world.
In modern times, we demonstrate those traits in terms of compassion, in terms of courage, and in terms of tolerance.
University students have been amongst a large crowd at the dawn service at Auckland's War Memorial Museum this morning. Amongst them was Hannah Pym. It's the second time she's been to the event, and she's grateful it wasn't pouring with rain this time.
I like how they incorporate the Australian element because we lived for 7 years in Australia. So yeah, our great-grandfather was in the Secret Service in World War II, but on the British side because our family's British. So we've always had an involvement in military history in our family.
World War II veteran Ralph Williams is one of around 6,000 who made the effort to get up early for the dawn service in Christchurch.
It was wonderful, very emotional, and it's getting bigger every year. But I'm afraid to say it's been the last time I've been coming after all the years because I was 94 in December, and it's a big effort to get here now.
Mr. Williams says it's been terrific to see so many people, and especially so many young people, at the service. John Colimer from Niue has been attending the Auckland Dawn Parade for the past 10 years and says the turnout this morning is the biggest he's seen. He says he can remember days when he could stand on the stairs and see everything. Today he was behind the museum building and had to settle for just hearing what was happening on loudspeakers because he couldn't even see the big screen.
We have family connections from our soldiers that went from Niue, to come to New Zealand from Niue. So I've been here every year since I was aware that we had soldiers coming. I really wasn't aware, and it's about 10 years now.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have made an unexpected appearance at Canberra's dawn service. It's the first time in 44 years members of the royal family have attended the event.
Lest we forget, Anzac Day breakfast with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Newstalk ZB with Chris Lynch this Anzac Day. Thank you so much for your company this morning. I want to take some talk back now. 340 1098 or 0800 80 1080. What I want to ask you this morning is, how are you marking today? How are you remembering our fallen soldiers? And I guess the other question we need to ask this morning is, what does Anzac Day mean for you this morning? Get on the phone now, give us a call, 0800 80 1080. The lines are open. I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this morning. Have you attended any of the local dawn services this morning up and down the country, young or old? Was it worth it? And was it an emotional occasion for you? Perhaps on this day you have a special message for our return service soldiers. What is that message? 0800 80 1080. The lines are open. What is your message to the return servicemen and women listening to this program right now? Because on this day in 1915, 8 months into the First World War, Allied soldiers landed on the shores of the Gallipoli campaign. This was an absolute military catastrophe, which in my view, it really does signify the horrors of war. But I also want to ask you the question is, what have we learnt? And what do we learn on Anzac Day? What do we learn from the First and Second World Wars? The lines are open. I welcome you to join me on this program this morning right now. 340 1098 or 0800 80 1080. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, Chris. How are you today?
Very well, thanks, Angie. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you for a good show today.
Thank you.
Anzac Day, we all have a lot to be thankful for. Those people went and sacrificed their lives. I know Anzac Day is about the First World War, but let's not forget our family and return servicemen, men and women that fought in other wars as well.
Absolutely. What wars do you speak of, Angie?
Well, there's the Second World War. They're still fighting today, and sometimes it just makes me wonder if anybody's ever learnt anything.
You make a good point there, because as I was saying to various military historians this morning, have we learned anything when we continue to have so many global wars today? Afghanistan, Iraq, wars continue.
They do. And sadly, it's probably going to continue for all our lives. It's just sad, I think, the whole thing.
It is sad. Why is peace so difficult to maintain on a global level, do you think, Angie?
I don't know whether sometimes it comes to religion or whether it comes down to greed. I don't know, Chris. People just don't learn.
You know what? Probably a bit of both.
Yes.
And Angie, you have a good day. Thanks so much for calling in this morning. Pat, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Pat.
Good morning. I haven't been to a service yet. I have watched them on television, which was quite moving, and I will be going to a local one, which is at 2 o'clock. And I just want to say thank you for those who have done what they did.
Very special occasion, isn't it?
It is. It really is. Yeah, my father.
How were you?
My father fought in World War II, but as Angie said, when does it stop? And I don't know that it will. It's a pursuit of power for some people.
Power of what, though?
I don't know. And nobody wins. That's the thing. There's no winners.
No. It is sad, but it seems like as a global community, we haven't learned much, if I'm being honest, because wars continue today.
They do, yeah.
And I wonder if our return service men and women find that almost offensive.
I'd be surprised if they don't find it offensive. I mean, they gave a lot, and for what reward,
Perhaps finally, what are you doing? What will you do for the rest of today, Pat? How will you remember?
Well, think about things and people, and just have a quiet day.
Good on you, Pat. Thanks so much for calling in this morning.
Thank you.
Have a great day. It's Newstalk ZB 0800 80 1080. This morning on the program, I'm asking you a very simple question. What does Anzac Day mean for you? Also, did you attend any of the dawn services this morning? Were you a first-time attendee? What was it like? Was it worth it? Was it an emotional occasion for you? Also on this morning, the program, perhaps you have a special message for our return service soldiers. What is that message? Share it with the rest of our listeners this morning. 0800 80 1080. 80 1080. You may wish to also email me this morning, chris@newstalkzb.co.nz. And just a quick note this morning, if you head to newstalkzb.co.nz, there are some fabulous photos of Auckland's dawn service there this morning. That's at newstalkzb.co.nz. We'll take a quick break and we'll speak to a few more of your callers this morning. A few lines spare, 0800 80 1080.
Lest we forget. Anzac Day Breakfast with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Diane, good morning to you.
Good morning, Chris. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Diane.
Good. I have been to the Dawn Parade this morning and I thought it was very moving and extremely well done. It was very, very good and so many people had turned up. I thought it was wonderful.
Good for you. What part of the country are you calling from this morning?
I'm from Christchurch.
So you went to the one in Cranmer Square?
Yes, that's right. So I thought they'd put it together very well since we've lost our cathedral in the middle of the city. So it was really great. And then I will go down shortly. I went with my son this morning who wore my granddad's medals. So it was his great-grandfather's.
Yes.
And the three of us will go down this morning to my granddad's, to my father's grave because they both, one was First World War. And actually my granddad served part of the Second World War as well as a home guard out at Burnham, and then my dad was in the Navy. So we're very, very proud of what they went through and what they did for our country. So we go down and we always put a poppy on his grave on Anzac Day.
Diane, how old's your son?
My son's 34, and he is very, very into... I'm very proud of him because not many people of that sort of age group think of their grandfathers and great-grandfathers in war and what they did, and so it was wonderful. We both walked from Addington down, so it was lovely.
And perhaps, finally, Diane, there were many people in Christchurch this morning at the service?
Yes, there were. I was very proud of everybody to turn up. It was a lovely morning, weather-wise, and so many people did turn out.
Well, that's really nice, Diane. You have a lovely day. Thanks for calling in this morning. Anna, good morning to you.
Oh, good morning. Anzac Day. I'm divided between being terribly, terribly grateful that the New Zealanders have gone overseas and fought and kept the wars overseas ever since the New Zealand wars of the 1800s, and terribly, terribly sad about the deaths and the tragic lives of the people who came back after they'd survived all that carnage. I was also thinking that maybe the turnout at the Anzac Parade are becoming bigger because every time you turn the TV on now or the radio, war is in your face in Syria and Africa and wherever all the Ukraine, wherever the wars are. It's so much more in your face now than it used to be.
That's right. It is, and it continues to be relevant for our young people, sadly. So perhaps that's why so many of our young people continue to turn out to Anzac Day commemorations. Just a quick email in from Lauren in Queenstown. She writes, "Hi Chris, we just attended a rainy but packed out dawn service here in Queenstown. We took our 4-year-old and our 18-month-old baby. I want them to grow up knowing the sacrifices made by our forefathers to give them a peaceful, safe place to live in. I also want them to grow up to know how lucky they are to have a father come home every day, not off fighting in the trenches and never to return. Cheers, Lauren." Thank you so much for that. We'll catch up with Danny Watson next here at Newstalk ZB.
Anzac Day 2014 with Chris Lynch on Newstalk ZB.
Well, Danny Watson's here after 9 a.m. this morning. G'day, Danny.
How you doing?
Very well, thank you. I want to ask you this question, Danny. You had a lot of callers talking about Anzac Day on your program yesterday, but I want to ask you this. What does Anzac Day mean for you?
It means getting up before dawn. It means going and standing on top of Takarunga, which is a little mountain in Devonport, where I used to meet every morning on Anzac Day with a dear friend of mine who couldn't face the parades because of what happened to him in Vietnam. And the two of us would start the day. And today, I wandered down onto Windsor Reserve and walked amongst the white crosses. Those that have seen the Herald will have seen some of them on the front page of the Herald with the names and the families of the men who died, not just in the First World War, Second World War, but even the Boer War. And when you walk amongst them, it just brings home the fact that you and I, Chris, missed out on something that was a bloody horror. And I thank my lucky stars. That's what Anzac Day means to me.
I've done something similar. It really is a unique experience when you see the crosses for the first time. It's powerful.
Oh, it's one of those days where every man, full of testosterone that I know is reduced to the point of or to tears. Yeah, it's a very special day.
And the sad thing is, war continues today. And I was discussing this on Talkback earlier, whether our returned servicemen would feel frustrated by that, Danny.
I don't know. My uncle Lou, who's long gone, he was captured in Crete, spent a lot of the Second World War in German prisoner war camps, and he came back a very, very angry man and hurt and damaged in lots of ways. And we were sitting, and I was a real youngster at the time, and we were sitting there talking, and he looked at me because I was going to go off and join the army, and he thought it was a great thing to do, but he said, "You know something, son?" He said, "I don't think we've ever had such a great time of peace." And I said, I think at the time Angola was happening and goodness knows what else. He said, no, think it through. He said, you really think it through. You're not talking of hundreds of thousands and millions of people being killed. You're talking of casualties in tens and hundreds. And he said he thought it was worthwhile because it meant even though war continues, we still live in the greatest time of peace. And I carry that to this day.
Danny, you've got a few special guests coming in for your show this morning. We've got 30 seconds.
Yes, we've got Lieutenant Colonel Chris Mullane, retired, Kingi Taurua. His whole family has served this nation. Julia Wilcox from Māori Television and the Minister of Defence. You have a good afternoon.
Sounds like a fantastic. You have a good afternoon too, Danny. God bless our returned servicemen and women. I'm Chris Lynch. Thank you so much for your company this morning. News is next at Newstalk ZB.